and hello, Roy, to my partner who will be presenting this All About Occupation seminar with me, and hello to everyone who's here with us for this session. So the title of our webinar is Philippinizing, the concept of occupation from a critical and linguistic perspective. I will be joined in by my colleague, Roi Charles Pineda, who will be discussing the second part of this lecture. So I just would like to inform everyone that this presentation is largely grounded on these works. One of that is a recent publication from the Journal of Occupational Science with my colleagues who did a research on hidden Filipino occupations as portrayed by mass media. And of course, a presentation by Roy, which was presented in the WFOT Congress in Paris last year. So if you want to get in touch with these works, then you can just send us an email. Our email addresses are here on the screen, and we can share this with you. We have two main aims for this webinar. The first one is to describe the Philippinized or indigenized / decolonized meaning of occupation, grounded on applied linguistics and occupational science methodologies and epistemologies within the Filipino context. And the second aim is to illuminate the hidden, non-sanctioned, and the dark side of Filipino occupation situated in their social realities. And what we're going to do is we're going to intersect these two aims so that we can somehow tell you a story of how we were able to do the Philippinization process when it comes to the concept of occupation. So first, the concept of Philippinization. When we looked in the internet or when we look back into the literature, what this concept means is basically the act or the process of making something Filipino, which is based in the Philippines, the country where we are all from. So you can see the map here, and the Philippines is in Southeast Asia and near the Pacific Islands. It's a very small country with an Asian heritage, with a lot of different cross-cultural intersections within our identity. According to Dobbs in 2013, historically, the concept Philippinization is a counter-concept developed from the thesis of Phelan in 1959, who studied about this concept, which means that Philippinization entailed the initiative of native Filipinos in the process of evangelization. So, because we were colonized by the Spanish Empire for 300 years, and one of the ways that we were colonized was through Christianity, and it's called Christianization. But for the Filipinos who were Christianized at that time, the Filipinos did not just want to be Christianized passively, they wanted to be an active part of this Christianization. So they made things Filipino when it comes to Catholicism or Christianity. So this is where it all started. In other words, Philippinization is a decolonial concept that describes the proactive efforts of Filipinos to make a colonizing concept their own. And this is where we're going to draw our perspective on when it comes to conceptualizing occupations. So when it comes to the concept of occupations, there are different kinds of perspectives, and we're not going to be able to discuss all of them, but we have 3 or 4 perspectives that we're going to discuss in this webinar. The first one is the most dominant or the most well-known probably is the Western perspective of occupation, which makes occupation perceived as something that is healthy, a healthy activity. It could also mean that it is ideal and it is also an expected way of living. This is according to Cantarsis and Molyneux in 2011. And to some extent, the Western perspective perceives occupation from a privileged point of view, underpinned by individualistic pursuits. So this concept is still evolving, and because of other perspectives, such as the Eastern or the Global South perspective, in some literature, these perspectives were seen as alternative, and I do not necessarily agree with that it is an alternative, because it is actually a perspective. When it comes to this perspective, occupation is situated within a space where power dynamics or power relations are constantly at play due to concepts such as colonialism. From the Global South and Eastern perspective, occupation is also seen to be collectively done by a group of people, an example of which is the Ubuntu in Africa. It is also underpinned by migratory experiences and constant acculturation among people from, for example, Asia or from Latin America. So their occupations are influenced by a lot of migratory experiences, and this is according to Lee's scoping review in 2019. The newer perspectives when it comes to scrutinizing the concept of occupation would really come from our colleagues, especially from Rebecca Twinley, The Dark Side of Occupation, Non-Sanctioned Occupations from Nikki Kaipek, and recently an article which I did with Rebecca and Pauline, and we called these occupations hidden because they are not part of the traditional way of how we perceive occupations. And altogether, these could be considered critical perspectives on occupation. So this is the third perspective that we're going to talk about. And in this All About Occupation webinar, what we're going to try to expound a little bit would be a decolonial perspective, or we want to go a bit further. We want to call it a Philippinized perspective. And that will be discussed in the next part of this session. But before we go into that, we just wanted to share with you some existing local studies on Filipino occupations based on occupational science. So in the review or the research I did, at least when I looked into the literature when it comes to Filipino occupations, they do not just describe our occupations as hidden, unsanctioned, illicit, and harmful. There are ingredients of that, but as you can see in this outline, these are how Filipino occupations could be described. So, for example, it is really connected to contexts. Filipinos have occupations that are not just organizing, but also disorganizing or chaotic, and they find meaning in a chaotic context, or when you do things in a disorganized way. For example, another example is facilitative of injustice experience and or achieving justice. So these could be meaningful occupations for people from the Philippines. And of course, one interesting findings would be occupations for Filipinos require the feeling of suffering or paghihirap or a sense of propriety, or hiya. So these are just some of the descriptions or perceptions of on Filipino occupations, which are not really how occupations is defined by traditional definitions. And that is something that we would like to investigate on. And if you want to know more about how we outlined or how we identified hidden occupations, so these are just some of them, as you can see in the pictures here. So an example could be pagpag, or eating food scraps, or nganga here, down, chewing betel nut, which is actually a plant which has some psychoactive properties. Pamamalimos, or begging, or mendicancy. So these are just some of the hidden occupations that we think are part of our lives, in our daily lives, which we see and observe in our daily living. And if you want to know more about that, you can just grab a copy of our recent article, which I mentioned earlier. But again, going back to our perspectives, different perspectives, we just didn't want to use Western, Global South, Eastern perspective or critical perspectives. We want to go a notch further, or we want to go further in our investigation. That's why we wanted to look at the concept of occupation from the process of Philippinization. And here is Roi to give us an overview of what we have been doing in the past 2 years in doing this process. Roi?
Yes, so good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So I take the take the baton from Mike to continue our webinar. So in what you see in the slide now is like something that I really like a meme from long ago about the conundrum faced by Filipino occupational therapists. You and probably every single time you have to meet a new client, a new patient, you will have to explain what occupational therapy does, what occupational therapists do, and if I look back on my own experience, it's not just my clients as well, but also everyone from my environment, like my parents, my family, all have different ideas of what occupational therapists do. And one of the things that we were looking at is, why is this so? And we can't really say for certain why with the definitive answer, but from our own assumptions and from our own readings, we believe that part of the history of occupational therapy is, of course, our founding fathers or parents of occupational therapists deciding what to call the profession. And as we know, historically, the founders of the professions come from different disciplines. And so calling a new profession that will encompass the different perspectives of different founders was a big challenge. And the decision to pick occupation rather than activities or arts and crafts therapy was a decision done to encompass the many possible perspectives that each of the founders have. And that in a way helped create a very broad sense of the profession, but is a double-edged sword when it comes to clarity on what we do. And so even in countries which speak English, it's not always clear to the people what occupational therapists do, and the additional difficulty, the additional challenge of translating this profession, this word, this concept into languages all over the world, because occupational therapy now is found in everywhere. So that was a big challenge for us in the Philippines. So how do we do it now in the Philippines? So as a student, so I can speak of it from my experience. Maybe it has changed now, but from when I was a student, we were of course taught fully in English, and once we have to go in the clinics and in practice, we have to speak to lay people, to our clients who have variable levels of English comprehension, which means that it is more advantageous to talk to them in Filipino. And then there lies the difficulty. How do we translate all the concepts that we've been taught in our undergraduate years to people using the Filipino language? Next slide, Mike. So we try to investigate now from this challenge that we have, that we always face. How do we Philippinize the concept of occupation? And it's not just merely trying to find a translation for occupation, but to look at how this concept is distinctly understood and experienced and expressed by Filipino speakers. And this process, as Mike mentioned, is not a passive process. It is a proactive effort to do, to implement. And so we early on understood that as occupational therapists, we do not have the methodologies at our fingertips to implement such a study. And so we approached other professions, other disciplines, to help reinforce the limitations that we have as occupational therapists and occupational science. So besides the occupational therapists and occupational scientists in the research group, we also have an applied linguist, some data scientists, sociologists, and Philippine studies expert. Next slide, Mike. So what was the methodology that we used? So we used Corpus linguistics, which is basically, people might think that it is a branch of linguistics, but rather it is a methodology primarily used by linguistics, but not just for them. And so what it does is to analyze written text that can be analyzed quantitatively and qualitatively. And so we will describe briefly what the methodology was about. So the first step was to go to dictionary analysis. So what are the actual words that are in Filipino that will encompass the meaning of occupation as we understand it in the discipline of occupational science or occupational therapy? And among the words that we were able to find were, so you can see on the screen now that Tagalog, the Filipino words, but I will use the English one to facilitate like understanding for everyone. But mostly these words revolve around the meaning of occupation as work or livelihood, responsibility, task, and activity. Of course, there's a lot more other words that can be used as a translation for occupation, but for the piloting that we were doing at the time, we used this for Filipino words. Next slide. Once we have a working keywords for our corpus linguistics, we started building a corpus. So corpus is essentially a body of text, and this body of text can come from many sources. But since what we are trying to look is how can we create, or how can we find a conceptualization of occupations that can easily translate to communications with lay people, we wanted to find corpus that is in the register or the language use of people who uses the language in their everyday purposes. So we're not interested in academic level of conversations or specialized conversations in sciences or in other disciplines, but more like an everyday language use. So for this reason, the corpus we primarily built out of news articles and Wikipedia articles, coming from a directory of corpus that is accessible to everyone. So once we have the corpus, we then implemented natural language processing. So these are techniques that allow us to simplify, to process the natural language quirks of the Filipino language to make it easier to analyze later. And this involves primarily 3 steps. The first one is case folding, which is as the name implies, it's removing all uppercase letters and folding them into lowercase letters. So that means words that may appear at the beginning of the sentence, which is often capitalized, is interpreted in the same way as the same word appearing somewhere else but it's not capitalized. We also made use of stop word removals, which is the removal of function words which does not have in itself meaning. So, for example, the article in the English language, the, or a, an, some prepositions at, on, behind, they do carry meaning, but in itself does not. So after all of these words, which does not will not give us any interpretation of occupation, we lemmatize the word. So lemmatization is essentially the process of grouping together different inflected forms of the same word. So we can think of word like strong. So the strong could appear in a text as strongly, stronger, strongest, strongness, strongish, or overstrong. And these are all essentially the same. They all carry the same meaning, and so they will be interpreted and analyzed as a single entity. And then afterwards, we filter all the sections of the text that actually carries the keywords. This is what we call keyword filtering. Next slide, Mike. Afterwards, we now go to collocation analysis, which is comprised of two processes, which is a collocation identification and data visualization. Next slide. So what we do with a collocation identification. So the definition of a collocate is, or these are a pair of words that are in mutual co-occurrence, which means that these words are in close proximity to each other, and the likelihood of seeing them together is higher than what can be attributed to chance. For example, consider the two synonymous adjectives strong and powerful. Either of these words may co-occur with the word argument, as in strong argument or powerful argument. However, natural language use will show us that these adjectives are not always interchangeable. You would expect the word tea to be described as strong tea, but not so much as powerful tea. Likewise, you're more likely to see powerful car than strong car. And so what we are looking at are what are the usual collocates of our keywords that will help us create a more contextual meaning of the word occupation as it is used by Filipino speakers. After we have an idea of what are the keywords, what are the collocates, what are the words that co-occur with our keywords, work, livelihood, responsibility, we visualize then the words as you can see here on the right side of the screen for our 4 keywords that are marked with the maroon colored circles. And you can see what are the words surrounding them. And from these, we create a network that help us visualize and describe what it is and how it is used in context. So what did we find? So this is I know the graph is a bit too small to show, but it is indeed quite complex to analyze in one go. And if people are interested to discuss this a bit more, maybe you could ask questions later, or to send us an email for more in-depth conversation. But to give you briefly what we found. Next slide, Mike. The thematic analysis of these collocates gave us a guide in defining what occupations are as it is used by Filipino. What we find was that occupation is seen as productivity and effort. It is understood that you would see the many terms that surround the word, especially the word work and livelihood, as something that is done with dedication, that doing so creates a sense of being busy. And then also, occupation is seen as a commitment of doing. So it's not simply doing, it's the being committed to do something. And we see a lot of qualifiers to this committedness as some words, including here in the lower right. I know it's a bit small. Yeah, sinumpaan, which is like sworn duty. Then there's also the next one is there is a big concern in the conversations of Filipino in everyday, in language use, of big concern for the loss of occupation, often combined with work. So it reveals the constant struggle Filipinos have with job insecurity, and tells us that a lot of invoking a lot of the sense of vulnerability among Filipinos, where life is not necessarily about living, but about surviving. And lastly, the collocation analysis also revealed that occupations are not just as occupational therapists envision it, as health promoting, but there are also aspects of occupation that challenges morality or the law. You can see it in here, in the word gawain, a bit on the top side. You could see the word illegal, or false, or wrong. You could also see some examples of illicit activities, such as sexual activities. Not necessarily, it's not always used in context. Of course, once the collocates are seen in the actual sentence, it's not always necessary meaning that it is illicit work as in prostitution, but it could also be sexual activity as done and as understood within occupational therapy. Next slide, Mike. So some key points from this linguistic study, and quite an important disclaimer is that this study is ongoing. So what we present here is the pilot analysis that we performed and presented in WFOT, but the current content of the analysis now encompasses all of the translations of occupation in Filipino. So in contrast to only the 4 words that I described earlier, we took in close to 15 other translated Filipino words and see how they're actually used in context. But from what we see is that key Filipino words related to occupation do not fully encompass the scope of what it means to the occupational therapy profession, which means that none of these keywords is like ideal for using. Of course, there is always the point of just using the word occupation as we're using it now. When we talk to our clients about occupation, we just use the word occupational therapy, occupations. And a lot of other countries actually use this approach. So I think in Brazil, they use occupational therapy. as occupation. Indonesian, in Bahasa Indonesia, they also use occupasi. So these are like the not the Filipinized, but more like the naturalized version of occupation in their native language. But the main difficulty is then, even if you use occupation, it does not necessarily help address the issue about us communicating to other people. So that's still a big challenge for us. There's also a need to critically reflect on how we use words to communicate our profession to the public. This is a big, I think this is a very big issue that occupational therapies need to look into. And I'm sure occupational science and a lot of other disciplines can come together. And hence, there is a need for more non-traditional and transdisciplinary methodologies that can help drive our understanding of our own profession forward. And yeah, something that we did not mention earlier, that the Philippines, as you've seen the map of, is composed of many islands. And because of the geographic setting of the Philippines, many of the islands develop their own languages. We're close to somewhere 150 to 200 languages in the Philippines. Although the majority of us speak the 10 major languages, but even within them, there is still some variations between, as I'm sure British, Australian, and American English would have their own variations. But because of this linguistic diversity, the present analysis, which we were doing in Filipino, is highly recommended to be replicated in other Philippine languages. Next slide. Do you want to summarize, or?
You can summarize.
Yeah, okay. So from the webinar, we described the Filipinized, or in the indigenized, the colonized concept of occupations grounded on applied linguistics and occupational science and epistemologies in the Filipino context. And we also attempted to illuminate the hidden, non-sanctioned, and the dark side of Filipino occupations situated in their social realities. So again, we go back to our references. I'm sure you can pause the YouTube video to take a good look into it, and maybe copy the DOIs if you want to take a more leisurely read on these articles. And the last one, so for anything, contact, collaborations, that's also very much welcome. At this end, in this, we also look at many other topics in occupational therapy and occupational sciences. You can also visit our ResearchGate and to see what other kinds of research that we're doing. And